This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in this week's NC Spin. We're inching ever closer to the November 3rd elections, and candidates are nervous and voters are tired. This week we ask how many people turned out for the start of early voting, examine some polls in the U.S. Senate and President races, and go in depth in the judicial and Council of State races. Joining our panel this week are Patrick Sebastian, communications consultant, Peg O'Connell, political analyst, Chris Fitzsimon, director of the state's Newsroom, and John Hood, syndicated columnist and author. We'll begin our uninterrupted discussion after these brief messages from our underwriters. In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
Let's begin the spin. Lots to talk about with the election, so let's get started. The contest for the U.S. Senate seat in North Carolina is the most expensive ever in our state, with more than $300 million being spent. Senator Tillis contracted COVID-19 almost at the same moment. We learned about an extramarital affair by Cal Cunningham. Patrick, 3 polls taken since the Cunningham revelations, and the Real Clear Politics averages still have him leading Tillis by between 4 and 10 points. How do you explain that?
Well, Tom, I'll say there's been 2 polls in the last 7 days that have it about a 1-point race. And look, regardless, this race has fundamentally changed. This is not as much about the affair as much as about people don't feel like they can trust Cal Cunningham anymore. He had himself on television as a good old American boy, and then this comes out, and then he hasn't told reporters. He hasn't been transparent about everything that happens. This race has completely changed and turned on its head. It certainly was not a great, a campaign, or the polls were not very close until about a few weeks ago. But this thing has changed, and I think you're going to see a tight race at the very end.
I got to take issue with that, Patrick. The latest polls that have been coming out, with the exception of East Carolina was close, the Emerson poll was close, but people are still saying they're going to vote for Cunningham. Peg, why is that? Are they that eager to get rid of Tom Tillis that they'll forgive Cunningham, or does it just not make any difference anymore?
Well, I think Senator Tillis has tied himself so closely to President Trump that I think that's what you're seeing in this point spread. And I don't think, I think he thought that was a good thing when we started this election, but I don't think it's going to turn out to be such a good thing for him.
On Thursday, early voting started in North Carolina. Boy, did it start. 272,000 people showed up to vote the first day, contrasted with 166 in 2016. 500,000 absentee ballots have already been turned in and accepted. Some 11% of our voters have already voted, and on Friday they were standing in line in the rain to vote. Chris, what's motivated people to vote so much?
Well, I think there are a lot of people enthusiastic about this election on both sides. I think it does appear there might be a little more enthusiasm in some areas for the Democratic folks. I also think people see the news that COVID infections are going up in North Carolina and across the country. They don't want to wait until November. That's why they got absentee ballots. That's why they're now voting in person. It is interesting. The polls show, well, we'll see if this plays out, overwhelmingly the people who are voting early in either method support the Democrats in general, the Vice President Biden. The people who are waiting till Election Day, most of the polls show, support President Trump. So all this is going to even out. These races will be close, I think, in North Carolina. But there is a lot of enthusiasm right now. People really want to have a say in this election.
John, the big story continues to be absentee ballots in North Carolina. Heard 2 different courts sound off this past week. Federal court judge Bill Osteen says to the State Board of Elections, you cannot return those ballots. They will not count if they don't have witness signatures. We also had a state court ruling on this. What's going to happen there? What about these 6,800 or 7,000 ballots that are improperly filled out? What's going to happen?
What's going to happen with those, if they don't have a witness signature, they are going to be, those voters are going to be told they have to cast a new ballot. And that, I think, is the appropriate ruling because it is legally required to have a witness signature. But some of the other mistakes that voters have made can be corrected without submitting a new ballot. That was not affected by the federal ruling, and the state court ruling on that still makes sense. What is still up in the air and currently suspended by the appeals court are the other changes the State Board of Elections tried to make. They tried to allow people to turn in ballots without logging in, essentially a ballot harvesting invitation. And they wanted to count ballots that were postmarked on Election Day but not received during the legally required period of time. Both of those things, a federal court Judge Osteen criticized in his decision, but concluded he could not stop at this point. The state appeals court has suspended them briefly. That we'll see arguments on those two provisions next week.
All right, we've not talked much about the appellate court races in our state, but they're very important because so often our appellate courts have to resolve arguments, particularly political arguments between the governor and the legislature. Following the 2018 defeat of a Republican justice, the resignation of former Chief Justice Mark Martin, our highest court now has a 6-to-1 plurality of Democrats to Republicans. Republicans want to get back to at least that 4-3 margin they enjoyed prior to 2018. Peg, prior to the 2018 date, most of the high court decisions were either unanimous or had relatively big margins like 5-2 or 6-1, showing that there was pretty consensual agreements among the justices. Republicans say we've got a court that now heavily favors Democrat, need to be balanced better. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, first of all, Tom, it's not the job of the court to resolve political disputes. They are to interpret the law and the Constitution, and they're not supposed to be become involved in every political squabble between the legislature and the executive branch. Having said that, it seems to be that for the foreseeable future, the only adults in the room, as far as the leaders of our state and our nation, are the members of the court. As far as partisan balance, for a long time, the appellate court races were not labeled with partisan labels.
Right.
And now that has come back. And I think it should not matter.
All right, we got to. Yeah, I hate to cut you off. We got to let's get through some of these races. We got a lot to cover here. Let's move to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court race. Sherry Beasley, who's the current Chief Justice, is running against Paul Newby, who has more tenure on the highest court than any other justice there. Beasley was appointed by Governor Cooper. Newby's been a justice since 2004. Comments on that, John?
This is the marquee race in the judicial category. It is competitive. Not only does the Chief Justice serve as Chief Justice, but essentially that you're determining the control of the administrative office of the courts, and that has some effect on the law and the administration of law and order. But this is largely a race that will be determined by party affiliation and name recognition.
Right.
Newby has had some success in the past in elevating a judicial candidate's name recognition in creative ways.
All right, let's move to Supreme Court Justice Seat 2. This is Phil Berger, who has been on the Court of Appeals running against Lucy Inman. Patrick, tell us what you know about that particular race. Phil Berger was a former DA. He's been on the Court of Appeals since 2017. Lucy Inman has been on the Court of Appeals and a Superior Court judge. What's your handicapping on that race?
Well, Inman has seen herself as the backstop to the legislature. Phil Berger Jr. would be the only prosecutor that's on the Supreme Court if he wins this race. You've seen all these 6-1 landmark decisions, including reinstituting the Racial Justice Act, basically, which just let several people off death row. I think this is going to be a very close race. Conservative versus liberal. You couldn't have a more stark difference between the two justices, one that that carries out and one that wants to overturn everything.
All right, we got to move through these a little quicker, guys. The Supreme Court's Justice Seat 4 has got Mark Davis, who was appointed by Governor Cooper, running against Tamara Beringer, who is a professor at the Keenan School of Business, has been a former legislator and a member of our panel. Chris, handicap that for us very quickly.
I think this one might be the closest because I think Tamara Beringer is not seen as quite as idealist or as much of an ideologue as Paul Newby, for example. She was a member of sort of a moderate state senator. On the other hand, Mark Davis, the first Jewish Supreme Court justice in North Carolina's history, widely respected. The question will be how much will people, if people know a lot about these candidates, this could be the closest race, I think.
Interesting. Let's move now to the Court of Appeals. We got 5 races there. Several judges moving from the Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court. The legislature has now set that number at 15. We have 8 Democrats and 4 Republicans. In the Court of Appeals seat 4, we've got April Wood, a Republican district court judge and a certified juvenile court judge, running against Tricia Shields, who's a trial and appellate court attorney and a former president of the NC Defense Attorneys Association. Peg, what do we know about that, and how's that one looking?
You know, I think because there are partisan labels, like I don't think there should be, but there are partisan labels. I think people should look at the experience of the candidates. And I think a lot of these races are going to be determined by how the top of the ticket does.
All right.
And if Cooper and Biden come on strong, I think that could make a difference for the courts.
Could be. You're exactly right. All right, let's look at Court of Appeals seat 5. John, we've got Laura Cubbage, who's a Superior Court judge and former district court judge, a former assistant attorney general, running against Fred Gore, a district court judge and former clerk of the Court of Appeals. What do we know about that race?
Judge versus judge. You can't say very much in these appeals court races, so they are running on their experience. Gore is an African-American Republican, an interesting candidate. I think, again, these appeals court races, if there are any issues at all, law and order might be one.
All right, let's move to Court of Appeals seat 6. We've got Chris Dillon, who currently serves on the Court of Appeals and has since 2012, an adjunct law professor at UNC and also Campbell, running against Grace Stiers, who is been in private practice and law clerk for Sam Ervin Jr., the third, actually. Chris, tell us what we know about that race.
Well, I'm pretty sure this is the only Republican incumbent on this list, Chris Dillon. I think that Chris Dillon is a little more well known because of that in some of these Republicans. Although I think Stiers is from Wake County. One point I want to make about all these races: if you look at the Democratic candidates, almost all of them are from urban areas, Raleigh, or the Raleigh Triangle, Charlotte, Greensboro. A lot of the Republicans are from rural areas like Union County. We'll get to that, or Whiteville and other places in the state, which is kind of an interesting trend, I think.
Peg, let's look at Court of Appeals seat 7. We got Reuben Young, who's a former legal counsel to the governor and has been on the Court of Appeals appointed against Jeff Carpenter, who's a Superior Court judge and, interestingly, a former state trooper in North Carolina. What can you tell us about that race?
Well, you know, Reuben Young has more trial court experience as a judge before coming into the service of the governor. So I think when you're measuring those two things, I think they come out about equal, but I would handicap it for Reuben Young.
All right, Court of Appeals seat 13, we've got Jefferson Griffith, who's a district court judge and former attorney for the Industrial Commission, running against Chris Brock, who's an incumbent Court of Appeals judge since 2019, former legal director for the ACLU. Patrick, handicap that one for us very quickly.
It's, again, so goes the Supreme Court, so goes the Court of Appeals. I will say Jefferson Griffin has run statewide before. That may give him a little bit better of a chance. He's a good candidate. But again, it's what the top of the ticket says.
All right. Well, while the governor's race gets most of the attention, we want to look at the 10 Council of State members in statewide elections and talk about them all. Obviously, the highlight race in that Council of State is the governor's race. And the polls show Roy Cooper, the incumbent, up by double digits. They had a debate Wednesday night. I'd like to ask very quickly, John, tell us about that debate. Anybody score any great points there? Anybody made any big mistakes there?
I think it was a fairly substantive debate. I think that Dan Forrest spent a lot of time on the key issues he wanted to make about schools and the economy, but also time on masks, which didn't really help him. Cooper was very aggressive to be ahead as much as you're saying. He was quite notably aggressive.
All right, let's put up that still again for the governor's race. I want to go through all of those candidates. We've got Roy Cooper, who is the incumbent, running against Dan Forrest, who's been the lieutenant governor since 2013. He's an architect from Charlotte. Al Pisano, a constitutional candidate, and Steve LaFour, the liberal. Chris, all the polls are showing that in that particular race, Cooper has a commanding lead. Is that going to hold?
Well, I mean, you never know in politics. We're still a couple weeks away, 2.5 weeks away, but I think this would be the biggest surprise of this election season if Governor Cooper was not reelected. There are some reports that national Republican governors' money has now stopped coming to North Carolina. I think the Republicans know they have resources they want to focus on other places. The worst you could say about the debate for Cooper is that nobody really won or lost, although I'm confused why Dan Forrest refuses to acknowledge that masks help reduce the spread of COVID.
And by the way, I made a mistake there. I said Stephen LaFour was a liberal. Actually, it's libertarian. Let's get that correct. Let's move on to the lieutenant governor's race. This one in the polls has been a virtual tie between Mark Robinson from Greensboro and against Yvonne Lewis Holley. Mark graduated from AT&T, owned a daycare center with his wife, got well known across the state, and took the lieutenant governor's primary owing to some remarks he made to the Greensboro City Council about gun rights. Yvonne Lewis has been a member of the House since 2013. She's from Raleigh. By the way, Michael Bloomberg's organization just indicated they're going to dump $2.5 million into that particular race in favor and support of Yvonne Lewis Holley. Is that going to make a big difference, Peg?
Well, I think the money helps, especially when you have two newbies coming to running for an office. Name recognition will be very good. I've worked with Representative Holley when she was in the legislature. I know her to be a person who really cares about the community. I don't know Mr. Robinson, although some of his Facebook posts have been very disturbing.
He's caught an awful lot of flack because of some of his comments about Muslims, about transgender delusion, about a Jewish filmmaker and Barack Obama. It's going to be an interesting race to watch. Move on to the Attorney General's race. We've got Josh Stein, who is the incumbent, former minority whip in the Senate, former senior deputy attorney general, running against Jim O'Neill, who is making his second effort in this race. He's a district attorney from Forsyth County, has been very well known throughout that region, the Piedmont region of the state, was defeated in the 2016 primary, however. Patrick, what can you tell us about that race?
So Josh Stein has had the fundraising advantage, but he has not had the polling advantage. I've seen several surveys lately, internally and externally, and he has not really pulled ahead. So in a lot of ways, this is going to be generic Republican versus generic Democrat at these down ballot races where there's not $10 million, $15 million. I think it's going to go down to the wire, just like in 2016, maybe a point race either way.
All right. Secretary of State's race, John. Elaine Marshall, who's former member of the state Senate and has been in that office for a number of years, running against E.C. Sykes, the Republican who's a North Carolina State grad, master's in management and a businessman. Most everything I've seen shows Marshall wins easily. Can you contradict that?
Few North Carolinians wake up in the morning burning to change direction in the Secretary of State's race.
I think you're absolutely correct. All right, moving to the treasurer's race, Chris. Ron Chatterjee, a professor at Duke University and an author, is running against Dale Falwell, who's the current incumbent there. I was interested in seeing that the polls showed these two are tied insofar as the polling is concerned. The big issue here is health care cost, the state health plan. Falwell has put forward some proposals. Chatterjee says he's got the wrong solutions. Handicap that one for us.
Well, I mean, you would think a statewide incumbent would be favored because he does have more name recognition, but this is a very unusual year. And if I still think Josh Stein is going to win by more than a point, but if Josh Stein's race is even remotely close, the converse of that is that this one is close because other than the state employees and a lot of other people who are involved in Raleigh politics, the average North Carolinian probably doesn't have a big handle on who either one of these candidates are, and it will be determined by the trends in this election, I think.
All right, let's move to the superintendent of public instruction's race. This is an open seat. Big contrast between the two candidates. Both of them are former classroom teachers. We've got Catherine Truitt, the Republican, education advisor to Governor McCrory, the chancellor of the Western Governors University in North Carolina, running against Jim Mangrum, former classroom teacher, started the elementary education program department at State, co-founded the STEM teacher program at UNCG. They have diametrically different positions insofar as working with the legislature. Peg, give us a rundown on that one.
Well, you know, I think it's interesting that the chancellor of an online university is so hell-bent on pushing all our students back to school. So Truitt, you know, I'm a public health advocate, so I view almost everything through that lens. I think she's, by saying that kids need to go back to school regardless of their health, doesn't make any sense. I think Mangrum will be a better candidate, and I think she'll be a better superintendent.
All right, Patrick, let's look at the state auditor's race here. We've got Beth Wood, who's the incumbent. She's worked in the treasurer's office. She's worked in the auditor's office before becoming auditor, running against Tony Wayne Street, who's got a master's in public administration, has had some personal issues, I guess we could say. The odds are Beth Wood, as the incumbent, probably is favored in this race. Any different opinion on that?
Yeah, I think Beth Wood's going to win this race. I wouldn't say that about every race. I think she's going to win this race. She's actually gained a lot of Republican support for some of the things she's done. She's been seen as kind of a somewhat nonpartisan auditor who goes after both sides. So she's gotten a lot of respect on both sides.
All right, let's move to the Commissioner of Agriculture race. Steve Troxler, who is the incumbent, owner and operator of a farm from North Carolina State, running against Jenna Wadsworth, who is a Soil and Water Conservation District Commissioner. She was magna cum laude at State with political science and women's studies. John, traditional thinking would say Troxler's got an easy run there.
Traditional thinking is right. And Wadsworth has done some unwise things that has ruined any chance she had of winning the race.
All right, let's move to Commissioner of Labor very quickly, if I can. Again, an open seat. We've got Jessica Holmes, who is a lawyer, former chair of the Wake County Board of Commissioners, specialized in labor and employment law, running against Josh Dobson, who is a member of the House, budget analyst and former commissioner. Chris, handicap it.
This is a fascinating race because it's an open seat. Cherie Berry is stepping down after a long time as being known as the elevator lady. I think that Jessica Holmes' urban base is a big deal in this race. I think she has a slight advantage as we go toward Election Day.
Patrick, I need to get to the Commissioner of Insurance race, Mike Causey. This is going to be an interesting contest, by the way, because we got a face-off between Wayne Goodwin, who's the current chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party, against Mike Causey, who is the incumbent insurance commissioner. Causey got a lot of kudos because of working with the FBI to bring to justice some illegal campaign contributions. Traditional wisdom says that might be close, but Causey might get the edge. Agree or disagree?
They've both gotten some decent publicity lately. You're the Democratic chairman with Goodwin. He's gotten a lot of publicity on the partisan side, and then Causey's gotten a lot of publicity taking on corruption. It's going to be a very close race.
All right, I got 2 minutes left in show, so I'm going to have to ask you very quickly to tell us something we don't know. Chris.
I think the lieutenant governor's race might be way more important than we think. It's not inconceivable the state Senate will be 25-25 after the election, which makes this lieutenant governor's race maybe the most important
Voting
in many years.
Break ties. Peg, tell us something we don't know very quickly.
So I'm going to be a first-time poll worker on Election Day at Lacey Elementary.
How about that? Congratulations for volunteering. I understand they've gotten their quota now. Patrick, tell us something we don't know.
The McCrory Connect NC bonds were sold at the lowest interest rate in modern history by Treasurer Dale Falwell. If we need to have bonds, we want to have the lowest rate possible, and those were done this week by the Falwell administration.
Yay, North Carolina. John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
Some of these down ballot races may not go the same way as the presidential race because of ballot drop-off, people not voting all the way down the ballot. We'll have to see how that phenomenon presents itself.
I've got one that I'd like to add into the mix here. This week we noted the 50th anniversary of the public broadcast system. These are the people that brought you Big Bird and Julia Child and Ken Burns and Barney and This Old House and NC Spin and a number of other great shows that we've watched through the years. Public broadcasting has certainly enriched our lives. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our website on ncspin.com or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And while there, be sure to subscribe to our free weekly email newsletter, our podcast, and the YouTube channel. Join us next week when we're going to look at legislative races in North Carolina and have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin. In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.